golden cage. To the outside world, Ethan Vale was the luckiest man alive. He was the crown jewel of a dynasty, flanked by 3 older brothers who treated his safety like a holy crusade. But as Ethan stood on the mahogany staircase of the Vale Manor, he felt less like a prince and more like a prisoner. He took one quiet step, then another. "Ethan, where are you going?" Adrian, the eldest and the family's iron hand, stood at the base of the stairs. He didn't look up from his watch, yet he saw everything. "Just out," Ethan said, his voice echoing in the marble foyer. "With who?" Lucien appeared in the doorway, lounging with a predatory grace. His eyes narrowed as if Ethan had just confessed to a crime. Before Ethan could pivot, the air behind him turned cold. Cassian, the silent shadow, was suddenly there. "You didn't mention a trip today," he murmured. "I didn't think I had to." Ethan forced a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "It's just a walk." A heavy silence followed, the kind born of a terrifying, unspoken agreement between the 3. "I'll come with you," Adrian decided. "I'm free too," Lucien added. Cassian simply jingled his keys. "I just want fresh air," Ethan pleaded. "There's fresh air in the garden," Cassian countered. "It's safer," Adrian added. That was the Vale family motto. Safe. To them, it was love. To Ethan, it was a slow suffocation. The breakout. 20 minutes later, Ethan was trapped in the back of the family SUV. It was a silent procession of protection. Cassian at the wheel, Lucien barking orders into a phone, and Adrian buried in a tablet. They weren't looking at him. For the first time in years, the surveillance had blinked. As the car slowed at a crowded city intersection, Ethan watched the pedestrians. They were messy, loud, and unmonitored. His pulse spiked. Before his brain could talk him out of it, his hand found the door handle. Click. He slipped out into the humid city air. He didn't run, not yet. He walked with his head down, blending into the sea of strangers, moving 1 block, then 2. When the panic of being caught finally overtook the thrill of the escape, he bolted. He turned a sharp corner, his lungs burning with the sudden, chaotic taste of freedom. Thud. The collision. Ethan slammed into a solid chest. Strong hands caught his shoulders, steadying him before he could hit the pavement. "Careful." The voice was a low, cool vibrato. Ethan looked up, breathless. The man holding him wasn't a frantic civilian. He was a pillar of composure in a tailored suit, his eyes sharp and analytical. He didn't look at Ethan with the suffocating worry of his brothers. He looked at him with the detached curiosity of a predator observing a stray bird. I'm sorry," Ethan stammered, pulling back. "I wasn't looking." "That's obvious," the stranger replied. There was no anger, only a faint, amused tilt of his head. He released Ethan's shoulders, giving him something his brothers never had: space. In the distance, the screech of tires echoed, a sound Ethan knew too well. His brothers had realized he was gone. The stranger noticed Ethan's flinch. He looked toward the sound, then back at the trembling boy in front of him. "Are you lost?" the man asked. Ethan hesitated, the walls of his life closing in from just a few blocks away. "Maybe," he whispered. A ghost of a smile touched the man's lips. "That explains the running." The roar of a high-performance engine echoed off the brick alleyways. Ethan's stomach plummeted. He knew that sound, Adrian's black sedan. It was the sound of his freedom being revoked. He looked at the stranger. The man hadn't moved. He stood like a monolith amidst the chaos, his shadow long and imposing on the pavement. "They're coming for you," the man said. It wasn't a question. He had read the terror in Ethan's eyes like a headline. "I can't go back yet," Ethan whispered, his voice cracking. "Not yet." The stranger's eyes flicked to the corner of the street where the black sedan swerved into view, tires screaming. Without a word, the man stepped back, opening the door to a sleek, silver coupe idling at the curb. "Then don't," the stranger said. Ethan didn't think. He dove into the passenger seat. The door hadn't even fully clicked shut before the stranger shifted into gear and pulled into the flow of traffic. disappearing into the city's concrete veins just as Adrian, Lucien, and Cassian spilled out of their car 3 blocks behind. The quiet after the storm. Inside the silver coupe, it was silent. No tablets clicking, no business calls, no heavy air of safety. Ethan watched the city blur past. For the first time in his life, he was with a total stranger. And yet, he felt more secure than he ever did behind the armored glass of the Vale estate. "I'm Julian," the man said, his eyes fixed on the road. "Ethan," he replied, then hesitated. "Are you going to kidnap me?" Julian let out a short, dry laugh. "You ran into me, Ethan. If anything, you kidnapped my afternoon. Where am I taking you?" Ethan looked at his hands. Somewhere they won't look. Somewhere normal. Julian studied him for a fraction of a second. He saw the expensive fabric of Ethan's clothes and the haunted look of a boy who had everything but a choice. "Normal it is," Julian murmured. "The search begins." Back on the sidewalk, the atmosphere was lethal. Adrian stood by the open door of their car, his face a mask of cold fury. Lucien was pacing, his phone a weapon in his hand as he barked at the family's security detail. "Check the street cams," Lucien hissed. "Now, if a single hair on his head is touched, I'll burn this district to the ground." Cassian was on his knees by the spot where Ethan had collided with Julian. He picked up a small silver cufflink, dropped in the scuffle. It wasn't Ethan's. Cassian stood up, his eyes dark and hollow. "He didn't just run," he said, his voice a low growl that made even Lucien freeze. "What do you mean?" Adrian asked, his voice dangerously quiet. Cassian held up the cufflink. It bore a crest, a stylized viper. "He's with Julian Thorne," Cassian said. The color drained from Adrian's face. The Thorne family wasn't just wealthy. They were the Vale's only rivals. The only people in the city powerful enough to keep something they wanted. "He isn't just missing," Adrian whispered, his hands clenching into white-knuckled fists. "He's been taken into the one house we can't break into, the Viper's Den." Julian pulled the car up to a quiet, unassuming cafe on the outskirts of the city. He led Ethan to a back table, ordering 2 coffees without asking. "You're very calm for someone who just helped a high-profile runner," Ethan said, leaning back. "I'm calm because I know who you are, Ethan Vale," Julian said, his gaze leveling with Ethan's. "And I know exactly who is looking for you." Ethan froze, his heart stuttering. "Then why help me?" Julian leaned in, the faint hint of that amused smile returning. "Because your brothers think the world is a cage they need to protect you from. I think the world is a game, and you just made the most interesting move I've seen in years." Julian's phone vibrated on the table. The caller ID showed a number Ethan recognized. "Adrian." Julian didn't answer. He simply flipped the phone over, silencing it. "Now," Julian said, "tell me what you want to do first. Since, for the first time in your life, no one is going to stop you." The false peace. For 2 hours, Ethan existed in a vacuum. He sat across from Julian in the dim light of the cafe, eating a sandwich he hadn't had to ask permission for. They talked about nothing: music, the architecture of the city, the way the light hit the harbor. For Julian, it was conversation. For Ethan, it was a revolution. "You're watching the door?" Julian observed, sipping his black coffee. Ethan jolted. "Force of habit. I keep expecting the glass to shatter and Adrian to walk through it." "He won't shatter the glass," Julian said smoothly. "The Vales prefer a surgical strike. They're likely surrounding this block as we speak, checking every exit, calculating the risk of an international incident." Ethan's appetite vanished. "You say that like you're not worried." Julian leaned forward, his eyes shimmering with a dangerous intelligence. "I'm a thorn, Ethan. My family thrived on the things your brothers fear. Chaos isn't a threat to me. It's an opportunity." The siege. Outside, the normal street began to change. A black SUV parked at the north end, another at the south. Men in charcoal suits, too fit to be tourists, began appearing on the sidewalks. The air grew thick with the static of a brewing storm. Suddenly, the cafe door chimed. It wasn't a squad of men. It was just one. Cassian. He didn't run. He didn't shout. He walked toward their table with the silent, rhythmic gait of a predator. He pulled out a chair and sat down next to Ethan without being asked. He didn't look at Julian. He only looked at Ethan's hand, resting on the table. "You've had your fun," Cassian said. His voice was a rasp, devoid of its usual calm. It was the sound of a man who had spent the last 2 hours in a state of pure, cold panic. "I'm not finished," Ethan said, though his hand trembled. "Ethan?" Cassian's voice dropped an octave, dripping with a terrifying kind of tenderness. "You don't know who this man is. You don't know what his family does. You left the house to get away from us, and you walked straight into the mouth of a shark. The confrontation." Julian didn't flinch. He leaned back, spreading his arms across the back of the booth. "A shark? That's uncharitable, Cassian. I've been a perfect host. I even let him choose his own lunch. When was the last time he did that at your table?" Cassian's eyes flicked to Julian, a flash of pure hatred igniting in them. "If you don't leave the table in the next 10 seconds, the peace treaty between our families dies today." "The treaty died the moment Adrian tried to wiretap my father's firm," Julian countered coolly. "Enough!" Ethan slammed his hand on the table. Both men fell silent. "I'm not a trophy," Ethan hissed, looking at Cassian. "And I'm not a move in your game," he added, looking at Julian. Ethan stood up. He looked at the door, where he could see Adrian standing by a car, his face pale and eyes wild. He looked at the window, where Lucien was pacing, his hand tucked inside his jacket where Ethan knew he carried a holster. "I'll go back," Ethan said to Cassian. Cassian's shoulders visibly relaxed, a shuddering breath escaping him. "Good. Let's go." "On one condition," Ethan added. Cassian froze. "Ethan, don't bargain. Just come home." "No. I'm going home," Ethan said, his voice gaining a strength it never had before. "But the locks on my door are coming off. And tomorrow I'm walking to this cafe. Alone. If I see a single one of your security teams, I'll call Julian, and I'll let him take me wherever he wants." The aftermath. The ride home was different. Adrian sat in the back with Ethan, but for the first time, he didn't reach for Ethan's hand. He sat in the corner, staring at his brother as if he were looking at a stranger, someone who had finally learned how to bite. "You put yourself in grave danger, Ethan," Adrian said, his voice trembling with suppressed emotion. "Thorn is a monster." "Maybe," Ethan said, staring out at the passing city lights. "But he's a monster who let me open my own door." As the iron gates of the Vale Manor swung shut behind them, Ethan didn't feel the usual weight of the cage. He felt the weight of a key in his pocket. He hadn't just escaped for an afternoon. He had started a war. And for the first time in his life, he was the one holding the map. The internal fracture. The heavy oak doors of the Vale Manor didn't just close. They sealed. Inside the grand foyer, the air was thick with the scent of expensive floor wax and unspoken fury. Adrian didn't wait for Ethan to take off his coat. He spun him around, his hands gripping Ethan's shoulders with a force that bordered on painful. "Do you have any idea what you've done?" Adrian's voice was a low, terrifying vibrate. "Julian Thorn isn't a friend. He isn't a choice. He is a predator who has spent a decade looking for a crack in our armor. And you just handed him the keys." "I handed him nothing." Ethan shoved Adrian's hands off. "I went for a walk. You're the ones who turned it into an international incident." Lucien stepped forward, his face flushed. "We found his cufflink in the street, Ethan. We thought you'd been snatched. We were 5 minutes away from calling in every favor the family owns to level that district." "And that's the problem," Ethan yelled, his voice cracking. "I can't even trip on a sidewalk without you three preparing for a massacre." The silent watcher. While Adrian and Lucien argued, Cassian remained by the door. He didn't join the shouting. He watched Ethan's eyes, the way they darted toward the windows, the way his fingers kept twitching toward his pocket. "He gave you something," Cassian said quietly. The shouting stopped. Adrian and Lucien turned to look at Cassian, then at Ethan. "He didn't give me anything?" Ethan lied, his heart hammering against his ribs. Cassian walked over, his movements slow and deliberate. He reached into Ethan's pocket before Ethan could move. He pulled out a small, heavy piece of cardstock. It was a business card. No name, no company, just a phone number embossed in silver and the silhouette of a viper. Adrian snatched it from Cassian's hand, his eyes scanning the digits as if they were a death warrant. He tore the card into 4 pieces and let them flutter to the marble floor. "You are not to leave this house," Adrian commanded. "Not tomorrow, not for a week. Until we deal with Thorn, you are under total lockdown." The rebellion. Ethan looked at the torn scraps of paper on the floor. He looked at his brothers, 3 men who had built a world intended to keep him safe, only to realize they had built a tomb. "I told you the conditions," Ethan said, his voice eerily calm. "The locks come off or I leave. You can't watch me every second. I'll find a window. I'll find a roof. I'll find a way." "Is that a threat?" Lucien asked, stepping closer, his shadow looming over Ethan. "It's a promise," Ethan whispered. He turned and walked up the stairs. For the first time, no one followed him. No one called out his name. He reached his bedroom and waited for the familiar sound of the electronic lock engaging from the outside. It never came. The midnight signal. Hours later, Ethan sat by his window, staring out at the darkened, sprawling gardens. The fresh air Cassian had promised felt stagnant. A faint light caught his eye. Down at the very edge of the estate, past the iron gates and the security cameras, a pair of headlights flashed twice in the darkness. Julian Thorn was still out there. Ethan reached into his other pocket, the one Cassian hadn't checked. His fingers brushed against a second card Julian had slipped into his sleeve during the walk to the car. On the back of this one, a single sentence was handwritten in elegant, sharp script. "The cage only stays locked if you believe the bars are real." Ethan looked back at his bedroom door. It was unlocked. He looked at the headlights in the distance. He realized then that his brothers weren't the only ones who loved him. But Julian Thorn was the only one who wanted to see what he would do with his freedom. And that was the most dangerous love of all. The truce. The morning air in the Vale Manor was eerily still. There were no grand speeches, no shouting matches. Adrian, Lucien, and Cassian sat at the long dining table, their silence heavier than any argument. "The perimeter is yours," Adrian said, eyes fixed on a cup of black coffee. "No guards in your shadow, no locks on the doors. You have until sunset. And no Julian Thorn," Lucien added, his voice gravelly from lack of sleep. "If we see his name or his car anywhere near you, the deal is dead. Permanently." Ethan nodded, his throat tight. He didn't want Julian's games. He didn't want his brother's war. He just wanted to know what it felt like to be a person instead of an asset. The invisible weight. Ethan stepped out of the manor without an escort. He took the train, something he'd only ever seen in movies. He sat on the plastic seat, watching the city blur past, feeling a strange, hollow thrill. No one was looking at him. No one was adjusting his tie or checking his pulse. He spent the morning doing the things he had written in journals for years. He went to a crowded, greasy diner and ordered pancakes with his hands. He sat in a public library for 2 hours, lost in a dusty corner where the air smelled of old paper, not expensive candles. He walked through a park, sitting on a bench just to watch a stray dog chase a ball. Every few minutes, his hand would drift to his pocket, expecting the vibration of a frantic text. But his phone remained silent. His brothers were holding their breath, honoring the truce, and that made the pressure in Ethan's chest even tighter. He knew they were suffering. He knew Adrian was likely staring at a blank screen, and Cassian was probably pacing the foyer like a caged wolf. The freedom tasted like honey, but it felt like a betrayal, the taste of normal. By mid-afternoon, Ethan found himself at a pier, watching the gray water of the harbor. He bought a cheap, oversized sweatshirt from a tourist stall, pulling the hood up. For the first time in his life, he was invisible. He wasn't Ethan Vale. He was just a boy in a hoodie watching the boats. He felt a sudden, sharp realization. He didn't want Julian Thorne's dangerous world any more than he wanted his brother's golden one. Julian had been right about the cage, but wrong about the solution. Ethan didn't need a new master, he needed a life. He checked his watch. It was 4 p.m. He could stay out longer. He could go to a movie. He could lose himself in the neon lights of the evening. But then, he saw a black sedan parked 3 blocks away. It wasn't a Thorne car. It was a Vale car. It wasn't following him, it was just there, waiting. Not to snatch him, but to be ready if he called. To be his safety net. The return. Ethan didn't run away from the car. He walked toward it. The window rolled down. It was Lucien. He looked exhausted, his usual sharp suit rumpled. He didn't jump out. He didn't demand Ethan get in. He just looked at him with a raw, desperate kind of hope. "Did you get your fresh air?" Lucien asked, his voice uncharacteristically soft. Ethan looked at the city, then back at his brother. He realized that as much as he hated the cage, he loved the men who built it. And they were just as trapped as he was, imprisoned by the fear of losing him. "I did," Ethan said. He opened the car door himself. He sat in the seat, and for the first time he didn't feel like he was being captured. "Let's go home, Lucien," Ethan said. "And tomorrow, I'm going to the museum, alone. But you can pick me up at 5. Lucien's hands gripped the steering wheel, his knuckles white. He nodded slowly. It wasn't a total victory for either of them. But as the car pulled away, the silence between them felt a little less like a prison and a little more like a bridge. The illusion of solitude. Ethan walked through the crowded city square, the hood of his sweatshirt pulled low. To anyone passing by, he was just another face in the sea of people. To himself, he was finally a ghost, untethered and unobserved. He stopped at a street performer's circle, watching a magician pull coins from thin air. He laughed, a genuine, light sound that felt foreign in his own chest. For the first time, he felt the thrill of being truly alone. He was wrong. High above the square, perched on the ledge of a 19th-century clock tower, a man in a matte black tactical suit adjusted the dial on a long-range scope. He didn't breathe as the crosshairs drifted over the crowd, finally settling on the back of Ethan's head. "Target is stationary. Sector 4 is clear." The sniper whispered into a comms link. "Copy that," a voice crackled back. "Not a stranger, but a member of the Vale Elite Guard. Keep eyes on the perimeter. If a Thorne scout so much as blinks in his direction, take the shot." The invisible shield. Ethan moved to a small flower stall, buying a single tulip. He didn't notice the tourist, standing 5 feet away, appearing to take a selfie while actually scanning the crowd for hidden weapons. He didn't notice the construction worker at the corner, whose heavy vest concealed a submachine gun and a direct line to Adrian. His brothers had realized they couldn't keep Ethan behind stone walls anymore, not without breaking his spirit. So they had turned the entire city into a fortress. Back at the manor, the library had been converted into a tactical command center. Monitors flickered with feeds from street cameras, drone footage, and hidden microphones. Lucien paced in front of the screens, his eyes tracking every person who brushed past Ethan. "That man in the gray coat," Lucien snapped, pointing to a screen. "He's been within 10 feet of Ethan for 3 blocks. Verify him." "He's a schoolteacher, sir," a technician replied. "Checked and cleared." "Check him again," Adrian commanded from the shadows of the room. He sat with his head in his hands, the agony of letting Ethan go outweighing the relief of knowing where he was. "Our enemies don't play by the rules. If they find out he's unprotected, they'll descend like vultures." The near miss. Ethan wandered into a quiet alleyway, seeking a shortcut to a bookstore he had always wanted to visit. The silence of the alley was a relief after the roar of the square. He didn't see the black van idling at the other end. He didn't see the side door slide open just an inch. But the snipers did. From 3 different rooftops, red laser dots, invisible to the naked eye, converged on the van's tires and the driver's head. 2 seconds. Cassian's voice came over the comms. He wasn't at the manor. He was in a nondescript car just one street over, his hand on his weapon. If that door opens further, we neutralize. The van's door hesitated. The occupants seemed to sense the sudden, heavy pressure of a dozen barrels aimed at their heart. The door slid shut. The van peeled away, tires screeching in a frantic retreat. Ethan blinked at the noise, watching the van disappear. Crazy drivers, he muttered to himself, stepping into the bookstore, completely unaware that a bloodbath had been averted by a fraction of a second. The golden shadow. As the sun began to set, Ethan stood at the designated pickup point. He felt energized, his skin buzzing with the joy of a successful day of independence. When Lucien's car pulled up, Ethan climbed in with a triumphant smile. "See," Ethan said, looking at Lucien's tired face. "I went out. I walked. I talked to people. And I'm perfectly fine. The world isn't as scary as you think it is." Lucien reached out, his hand trembling slightly as he brushed a stray hair from Ethan's forehead. He thought of the 42 armed men currently melting back into the shadows of the city. He thought of the snipers packing their bags and the drone pilots powering down. "Maybe you're right, Ethan," Lucien whispered, his voice thick with a lie that was the only way to keep his brother happy. "Maybe we were just worrying too much." Ethan leaned his head back against the seat, closing his eyes, satisfied with his new freedom. Outside the tinted window, the civilians on the sidewalk watched the car depart, their hands dropping from their concealed holsters only when the Vale tail lights faded into the distance. The cage wasn't gone. It had simply become the size of the world. The ghost in the gallery. Ethan thought he was being clever. To avoid the crowded markets where his brother's shadows were most obvious, he ducked into a high-end, minimalist art gallery tucked away in a quiet district. He spent an hour drifting through the silent, white-walled rooms, feeling the rarest of things. Peace. Then he felt the temperature in the room drop. It wasn't a draft. It was a presence. Lucien Thorne, the man the city's underground called the Ice, was standing in front of a massive, stark black canvas. He didn't have the frantic, suffocating energy of Ethan's brothers. He stood like a glacier, beautiful, silent, and capable of crushing anything in his path. Ethan's heart hammered. He immediately turned to leave, his mind racing. If Adrian sees him near me, the locks go back on. If Cassian sees us, I'll never see the sun again. Running so soon? Julian's voice drifted across the empty gallery, smooth as frosted glass. "And here I thought you were enjoying the view." The frozen standoff. Ethan stopped, his back to the man. "I can't talk to you. My brothers. They're everywhere. Even when I can't see them, they're there." Lucien moved. He didn't walk so much as glide, appearing at Ethan's side. He didn't touch him, but the sheer coldness of his charisma made Ethan's skin prickle. "I know," Lucien murmured, his sharp eyes flicking toward a pinhole camera in the corner of the ceiling. "There are 4 snipers currently arguing over which one gets to take my heart out if I reach for my pocket. It's quite a spectacle." Ethan flinched. "Then leave, please. If they think you're following me, they'll end this. I'll be back in that manor before the sun sets." Lucien finally looked at him, truly looked at him. There was no mockery in his gaze, only a strange, chilling fascination. Lucien Thorne didn't want things. He owned them or he destroyed them. But this boy, this fragile, defiant bird, was neither. "You're afraid of them," Lucien observed. "Not because they'll hurt you, but because they'll love you to death." "I just want to be left alone," Ethan whispered, his eyes pleading. The ice melts. For the first time in his public life, the ice did something illogical. Lucien stepped into Ethan's personal space, intentionally shielding him from the line of sight of the gallery's main window and the snipers beyond it. He used his tall, broad frame to create a tiny, private sanctuary where the Vale's eyes couldn't reach. "Then I'll make you a deal, Ethan Vale," Lucien said, his voice dropping to a low, intimate hum. "I won't follow you. I won't capture you. But the next time you feel the walls closing in, when their love feels like it's squeezing the air out of your lungs. Don't run to the streets. He reached out, his gloved fingers hovering just an inch from Ethan's cheek, never making contact. Look for the cold, Julian whispered. I am the only thing in this city they cannot control. And I am the only one who doesn't mind being the villain in their story if it means you get to breathe. The vanishing act. Before Ethan could respond, Julian stepped back. The coldness returned to his expression, the mask of the ice snapping back into place. Go, Julian commanded softly. Your brother Lucien's car just turned the corner. He's exactly 45 seconds away from storming this building with a small army. Ethan didn't wait. He bolted toward the back exit, his chest heaving. He made it to the sidewalk just as Lucien's black sedan screeched to a halt at the front entrance. When Lucien burst into the gallery, gun drawn and eyes manic, he found only an empty room and a single, stark black painting. Julian Thorne was gone. Having vanished into the shadows of the city, he knew better than anyone. Ethan stood a block away, clutching his tulip, his heart refusing to slow down. He had escaped his brother's sight for only a minute, but in that minute, he had realized something terrifying. His brothers offered him a cage of gold. Julian Thorne offered him a cage of ice. And for the first time, Ethan wasn't sure which one he was more tempted to walk into. The interrogation. The ride back to the manor was a silent storm. Lucien drove with one hand white-knuckled on the wheel, the other constantly adjusting his earpiece. He didn't ask Ethan if he was okay. He already knew. He had seen the thermal pings from the gallery. He had seen the two silhouettes merge into one on the heat signature feed. As they crossed the threshold of the manor, the doors didn't just shut, they bolted. Adrian was waiting in the foyer. He didn't look angry. He looked devastated, which was far worse. You met him, Adrian said, his voice flat. After everything we discussed. After the trust we tried to build today. I didn't meet him, Ethan shouted, throwing his tourist sweatshirt onto the marble floor. He was just there. I didn't say a word to him. I tried to leave, but he just talked at me. He touched you, Cassian said, stepping out from the shadows of the hallway. His eyes were fixed on Ethan's face, searching for a bruise, a mark, a sign of corruption. The drone saw him reach for you. He didn't touch me, Ethan's voice cracked. He was the only person all day who didn't treat me like a piece of glass, Cassian. There, and he gave me space while you three had a dozen snipers pointed at my head. The room went deathly quiet. The secret was out. The broken trust. Ethan looked from Adrian to Lucien to Cassian. The realization hit him like a physical blow. The freedom of the day had been a staged play. The wandering, the pancakes, the library. It had all been a simulation of independence, managed by a private army. You had snipers on me? Ethan whispered. The city is dangerous, Ethan. Adrian began, stepping forward, his hands reaching out in a plea. The Thorns, the syndicates. I was a target for your war. Ethan backed away, his eyes stinging. You didn't give me a day of freedom. You gave me a day of being live bait. He didn't wait for their excuses. He ran up the stairs, the sound of his footsteps echoing through the house that felt more like a mausoleum than ever before. He slammed his door and, for the first time, he was the one who turned the lock. The cold comfort. Inside his room, Ethan collapsed against the door. He felt sick. The love of his brothers felt like a heavy, wet blanket, muffling his life until he couldn't breathe. He reached into his pocket and pulled out the single tulip he had bought. It was crushed, its petals bruised from his frantic run. The midnight vigil. Downstairs, the brothers were in a state of collapse. He knows, Lucien said, staring at the security monitors. He'll never trust the perimeter again. We tighten it, Cassian said, his voice cold and sharp. No more games. If Thorne is reaching out to him in public, then the streets are no longer an option. We move Ethan to the country estate by morning. Adrian didn't answer. He was watching the feed of Ethan's bedroom door. He saw the light go out. He saw the silhouette of his youngest brother sitting by the window. "He's not a bird, Lucien," Adrian whispered, his heart breaking. "He's a Vale, and we've taught him too well how to survive a siege." Upstairs, Ethan watched the clock. 1:55 a.m. He looked at the window. He looked at the sprawling gardens below, where he knew at least 4 guards were currently patrolling with night vision goggles. He thought about the cold, steady gaze of Julian Thorne. Julian didn't love him. Ethan knew that. Julian wanted to spite his brothers. Julian wanted a piece of the Vale legacy. But as Ethan opened his window, feeling the bite of the night air, he realized he didn't care why Julian was helping him. He just cared that for the first time someone was offering him a way out, rather than a way in. He stepped onto the ledge. The war wasn't coming anymore. It was here. The midnight confrontation. Ethan didn't climb out the window. He didn't run for the pier. Instead, he turned away from the moonlight and walked back to his bedroom door. He unlocked it with a sharp click and threw it open. His 3 brothers were already in the hallway, caught in a tense, frantic formation. Adrian had his phone out, Lucien was checking a tablet, and Cassian was halfway toward the stairs, keys in hand. They froze when they saw him standing there. Not as a runaway, but as a man demanding an audience. "Sit down," Ethan said. It wasn't a request. Surprise flickered across Adrian's face, but he gestured toward the small sitting area at the end of the hall. The 4 of them sat, the 3 titans of the Vale Empire and the younger brother they treated like porcelain. The truth on the table. "I know about the snipers," Ethan began, his voice steady despite the hammering of his heart. Lucien opened his mouth to deflect, but Ethan held up a hand. "And I know about the civilians in the square. I know about the drones. I know that today wasn't freedom, it was a managed simulation. You let me walk out of the house just to put me under a microscope." "Ethan, the Thorne family is—" Adrian started. "I know what the Thorne name means," Ethan snapped. "I'm not a child. I know Julian is a predator. I know he's the ice. I know he would use me as a pawn to dismantle everything you've built if I gave him the chance. I'm not a fool, Adrian, but I'm also not a prisoner." He looked at them, really looked at them, the dark circles under their eyes and the way their hands twitched with the need to reach out and pull him back into a vault. "But I also know that if I can't speak to a stranger without a red dot appearing on their chest, I am not living," Ethan continued. "You say you're protecting me, but you're actually erasing me. You're making it so the only people I can ever know are the 3 of you. That's not safety. It's suffocation. The terms of surrender." Cassian leaned forward, his voice a low, pained rasp. "We almost lost you today. When we saw his signature near yours in that gallery, my heart stopped. If he had taken you—" "He didn't," Ethan said firmly, "because I didn't let him. I walked away. I came back to the car. I am a Vale just like you. I have your blood, your instincts, and your name. Trust the upbringing you gave me instead of fearing the world you live in." Ethan leaned in, his gaze moving between the 3 of them. "Here is how this works from now on," Ethan declared. "The snipers stay. The drones stay at the estate. If I am in public and someone approaches me, you do not intervene unless I give a signal. You stay in the background, the far background." "Ethan, that's an unacceptable risk," Lucien argued, his eyes darting to Adrian for support. "The alternative is that I leave for real," Ethan countered. "Not for a day, not for a walk. I will disappear so deep into the city that even your best trackers won't find me. I'd rather be a ghost on the streets than a puppet in this house." A new type of love silence descended over the hallway. For Adrian, Lucien, and Cassian, this was their greatest nightmare. The realization that their love had become the very thing Ethan needed to escape. Adrian finally spoke, his voice heavy with the weight of a leader making a concession he hated. "The snipers stay, the guards remain hidden, the perimeter remains at 2 blocks, not 2 feet. And you carry a distress beacon at all times." 1 block, Ethan bargained. "And I carry the beacon, but I decide when to press it." Adrian looked at his younger brothers. Lucien looked away, jaw tight. Cassian gave a single, agonized nod. 1 block, Adrian whispered. Ethan stood up. The suffocating pressure in his chest didn't vanish, but for the first time, he felt he could take a full breath. He walked over to Adrian and placed a hand on his shoulder. "I love you all," Ethan said softly, "but I need to be allowed to be afraid. I need to be allowed to take a risk. If you keep me from ever being in danger, you're keeping me from ever being brave." He turned and walked back into his room, closing the door. He didn't lock it this time. He didn't need to. He had finally carved a small, fragile space for himself in the middle of their storm. In the hallway, the three brothers remained in the dark, learning for the first time what it meant to truly protect someone. Letting go of the reins. The first test. The following afternoon was the quietest the Vale Manor had been in decades. Ethan dressed in a simple t-shirt and jeans. No tailored suits, no heavy fabrics that felt like armor. He walked down the stairs, and for the first time, no one intercepted him at the base. Adrian was in the library with the door open, his eyes fixed on a book he hadn't turned a page of in an hour. Lucien was in the kitchen, gripped by a sudden, intense interest in the coffee machine. Cassian was nowhere to be seen, though Ethan knew he was likely checking the battery on the distress beacon tucked into Ethan's pocket. "I'm going to the park," Ethan announced to the foyer, "to sit by the pond. Alone. Have a good time," Adrian said, his voice strained, as if the words were being pulled out of him with pliers. Ethan stepped out the front door. He didn't hear the hum of a drone. He didn't see a black SUV pull out of the garage. He walked to the edge of the estate, his skin prickling with the strange, naked sensation of truly being unwatched. The encounter. The park was bustling. Children ran through the grass. Couples shared ice cream. Ethan sat on a weathered wooden bench, leaning back and closing his eyes to the sun. "You look like a man who just escaped a very expensive prison." Ethan's eyes snapped open. Julian Thorne was standing a few feet away, dressed in casual charcoal linen, looking entirely too comfortable for a man who was technically in enemy territory. Ethan's heart hammered, not with fear, but with a sudden, sharp memory of his conversation with his brothers. He looked around. He saw a man reading a newspaper a block away who looked a little too fit. He saw a parked car with tinted windows. His brothers were there, somewhere in the far background, likely vibrating with the urge to intervene. "I told them to stay back," Ethan said, his voice low. "I noticed," Julian replied, sitting on the far end of the bench. He didn't look at Ethan. He looked at the ducks in the pond. "The air is a bit thinner today. Less gunpowder. It's an improvement." "Why are you here, Julian?" Ethan asked. "If they see us talking, they'll think I'm conspiring. They'll pull the leash back so fast I'll choke." "The warning." "I'm here because I was curious," Julian said, his voice like silk over stone. "I wanted to see if you actually had the spine to stand up to them. Most people in your position would have just stayed in the cage and complained about the quality of the gold." Julian finally turned his head, his blue eyes piercing. "But be careful, Ethan. Freedom isn't just about walking away from your brothers. It's about walking toward something else. And in this city, every path is owned by someone." "I don't want to be owned," Ethan said firmly. "Then you're going to be very lonely," Julian murmured. He stood up, brushing an invisible speck of dust from his trousers. As he moved, Ethan saw a flash of movement in the distance, a glint of sunlight off a lens. One of his brother's observers had spotted Julian. "Your shadow is getting restless," Julian noted, a shadow of a smile playing on his lips. "I should go before Adrian decides that one block is close enough to start a riot." The signal. Julian walked away, vanishing into the crowd as effortlessly as a ghost. A moment later, Ethan's phone vibrated. It was a text from Lucien. "Are you okay? Signal once if you need us." Ethan looked at the phone. He looked at the spot where Julian had been sitting. He could feel the eyes of his brother's world and the interest of Julian's world both pulling at him, like two different tides trying to claim the same shore. He didn't signal Lucien. Instead, he put the phone back in his pocket and stayed on the bench. He watched the sun begin to set, feeling the cold air of the evening settle in. He was in the middle of a war, but for the first time he wasn't the prize being fought over. He was a player on the board. He stayed in the park until the streetlights hummed to life, proving to his brothers, and to himself, that he could survive the dark without them holding his hand. When he finally walked back to the car waiting at the edge of the block, he didn't look for the guards. He looked at the stars. The cage was open. Now he just had to figure out how to fly. The lingering chill. The drive back to the manor was heavy with unasked questions. Lucien sat in the driver's seat, his jaw tight enough to snap bone. He didn't ask what Julian had said. He didn't ask why Ethan had allowed the Thorn Patriarch to sit on a bench with him for 10 minutes. To ask would be to admit he was suffocating Ethan again. To stay silent was its own kind of torture. When they arrived, the atmosphere in the house had shifted. Adrian was waiting in the dining room, a spread of Ethan's favorite foods laid out. A silent peace offering, or perhaps a bribe for the soul. "You were out late," Adrian said, his voice carefully neutral. "I was thinking," Ethan replied. He sat down, but he didn't eat. His mind was still back in the park, replaying the way Julian's voice had sounded. Not like a threat, but like a challenge. "He's a predator, Ethan," Cassian said, emerging from the kitchen. He looked tired. "He doesn't do casual park visits. Everything is a move. Every word is a hook." "I know," Ethan said softly, "but he's the only person who looks at me and sees a man instead of a disaster waiting to happen." The midnight invitation. Later that night, Ethan found an envelope tucked under his pillow. It wasn't there when he had gone down for dinner. His brother's security was absolute, which meant someone had bypassed the Vale's inner sanctum. Ethan's heart skipped. He opened it to find a single, heavy card. It wasn't a business card this time. It was an invitation to a private gallery opening, the Thorn Collection, where something blue was written on the back in that same sharp, elegant hand. Ethan looked at his wardrobe. Deep in the back was a navy silk suit he had never worn. It was a gift from Adrian, intended for a gala that had been cancelled because the Vales decided the venue was unsecured. He realized then that Julian wasn't just inviting him to an event. He was inviting him to a betrayal. To go to a Thorn event was to spit in the face of the Vale legacy. The Shadow's perspective. Across the city, in a penthouse made of glass and cold steel, Julian Thorn stood on his balcony. He held a glass of amber liquid, but he wasn't drinking. "You're obsessed," a voice said from the shadows. It was his lead strategist, a woman who had seen Julian dismantle empires without breaking a sweat. "The Vale boy is a liability. His brothers will burn this city to get him back. They've spent their lives making him a masterpiece," Julian said, his voice a low, dark hum. "They polished him, guarded him, and hid him away, but they forgot one thing." "What's that?" "A masterpiece is meant to be seen," Julian murmured. He thought of the way Ethan had looked on the bench, terrified but standing his ground. There was a fire in the boy that the Vales were trying to douse with safety. Julian didn't want to douse it. He wanted to see how bright it could burn. It started as curiosity, now it's turning to something he didn't want to name yet. Julian Thorn, the man who felt nothing, was fascinated by the warmth of a boy who lived in a golden cage. The brink of the storm. The next evening, Ethan walked into the living room dressed in the navy silk suit. Adrian, Lucien, and Cassian all stopped what they were doing. The air in the room turned static. They knew that suit. They knew what it meant when Ethan dressed for the world. "Where are you going?" Adrian asked, his voice dangerously quiet. "To a gallery," Ethan said. He held up the invitation. "Julian Thorn's gallery." Lucien stood up so fast his chair hit the floor. "Absolutely not. Ethan, you're asking for a war." "No," Ethan said, meeting Adrian's eyes. "Adrian, the brother who carried the weight of the family. I'm asking for the one-block rule to apply. I'm going. You can have your men outside. You can have your beacons in my pocket. But I am walking through that front door as a guest, not a prisoner." Adrian looked at Ethan for a long time. He saw the resolve. He saw the way Ethan was finally standing tall, no longer shrinking under their protective gaze. If he touches you, Adrian whispered, I will kill him. I don't care about the treaty. I don't care about the city. He won't, Ethan said, though he wasn't sure if he was telling the truth. As Ethan walked out to the car, he felt the heavy weight of his brother's eyes on his back. He was stepping into the den of the viper. But as he thought of Julian Thorne's cold, blue eyes, he didn't feel afraid. He felt a spark of something new, something that felt like the beginning of a very long, very beautiful disaster. The den of the viper. The Thorne Gallery was a monolith of black glass and aggressive, sharp angles, a stark contrast to the Baroque, gilded warmth of the Vale estate. As Ethan's car pulled to the curb, he felt the invisible net of his brother's tighten. He knew that, in the shadows of the surrounding buildings, Cassian's marksmen were settling into position. He knew Lucien was likely in a van nearby, monitoring the audio feed from the hidden mic zone into Ethan's cuff. But as Ethan stepped out, he felt something he hadn't expected, a rush of adrenaline. He wasn't just walking into a gallery, he was walking into a storm. He looked at the tinted windows of the car, knowing Adrian was watching his every move, and he didn't feel stifled. He felt seen. He walked up the steps alone. The navy silk of his suit caught the streetlights, a blue flame in a world of shadows. The guards at the door, men with cold eyes and Thorne insignias, didn't stop him. They bowed their heads, and for the first time, Ethan didn't feel like a treasure being guarded. He felt like a threat being acknowledged. The gravity of the ice. Inside, the atmosphere was suffocatingly elegant. The elite of the city moved like sharks in an aquarium. And at the center of it all stood Julian. Julian was dressed in black on black, looking every bit the ice the city feared. He was surrounded by power brokers, but the moment Ethan entered, Julian's focus shifted. It was a subtle pull, a narrowing of the eyes that made the rest of the room fade into a blur. Julian excused himself and walked toward Ethan. You wore the blue, Julian murmured, stopping just outside the boundary of a polite distance. It suits you. It makes you look less like a ghost and more like a storm. My brothers are watching, Ethan whispered, his heart drumming a frantic rhythm against his ribs. I know, Julian said, his voice a low, melodic hum. I can feel the lasers on the back of my neck. It's quite a thrill, isn't it? Knowing that one wrong move from me could start a war. Ethan paused. He realized Julian was right. The danger didn't make him want to run. It made his skin prickle with a strange, addictive electricity. He liked the high stakes. He liked being the center of the world's most dangerous tug-of-war. The private view. Julian gestured toward a private mezzanine. Come. I have something in the back that requires a more discerning eye. Ethan didn't hesitate. He followed Julian up the stairs, leaving the safety of the public eye. They entered a dimly lit room containing a single sculpture. A bird made of shattered glass, held together by thin, silver wires. It's held together by tension, Julian said, stepping up behind Ethan. He didn't touch him, but the heat radiating from his body was a sharp contrast to his cold reputation. Just like you, Ethan, you don't want to be safe. You want to see if the wires can hold your weight. Ethan turned to look at him. They were alone. No cameras, no brothers. Just the hum of the city outside and the proximity of a man who represented every risk Ethan had been taught to avoid. The thought, "You're right," Ethan whispered, his voice gaining a sudden, sharp edge of confidence. "I thought I hated the danger, but I think I just hated being the only one who didn't get to play the game." Julian reached out. His fingers, surprisingly warm, brushed the side of Ethan's neck, trailing up to his jawline. The contact was electric. "Is that so?" Julian murmured, leaning down until his lips were inches from Ethan's. "Then let's see how much tension you can handle." Julian's thumb traced the curve of Ethan's lower lip. Ethan didn't pull away. He didn't press the distress beacon in his pocket. Instead, he reached out, his fingers curling into the lapel of Julian's jacket, pulling the ice of the city into his own heat. The watchful piece. A block away, inside a darkened surveillance van, Lucien sat with his headset on. He watched the heat signatures on the screen, two figures, standing dangerously close in a private room. Cassian's hand was on the door handle of the van, his knuckles white. "He's too close, Lucien. We have to go in." Adrian, sitting in the back, watched the screen with a pained, stoic expression. He saw Ethan's silhouette lean into Julian's. He saw the way Ethan wasn't fighting, wasn't signaling, wasn't afraid. "No," Adrian said, his voice thick with a new, terrifying understanding. "He's not in trouble. He's exactly where he wants to be." For the first time, the brothers didn't storm the building. They sat in the dark, forced to watch as the brother they had raised to be a saint chose to dance with a demon. Ethan had found his thrill, and the Vales realized that the only thing more dangerous than the city was the fire they had accidentally cultivated in their brother's heart. The first kiss. In the dim light of the mezzanine, the air between Ethan and Julian felt like a live wire. Julian's hand moved from Ethan's jaw to the back of his neck, his fingers tangling in the soft hair there. He didn't rush. He watched Ethan's eyes, waiting for the flicker of fear that usually defined their interactions. It never came. Instead, he saw a dark, hungry curiosity. Julian leaned in, bridging the final inch. The kiss wasn't cold. It was a slow, deliberate burn, tasting of expensive wine and the sharp, metallic tang of adrenaline. Ethan let out a shaky breath, his hands tightening on Julian's lapels, anchoring himself as the world outside the room ceased to exist. For the first time in his life, Ethan wasn't being protected. He was being wanted. The silent spectators. In the surveillance van, the silence was deafening. The audio feed picked up the sound of Ethan's jagged breathing. On the thermal monitor, the two heat signatures merged into a single, pulsing glow. Lucien ripped his headset off, slamming it onto the console. "I can't listen to this," Lucien hissed, his face flushed with a mixture of betrayal and protective fury. "He's a thorn, Adrian. He's playing him like a violin." Cassian's hand moved to his sidearm, his eyes fixed on the door of the gallery. "One word, Adrian. Just give me one word and I'll pull him out of there." Adrian didn't move. He looked older than his years, the light of the monitors reflecting in his hollow eyes. He saw the way Ethan's silhouette was moving, not pulling away, but leaning in. Not a victim, but a participant. "If we go in now," Adrian whispered, his voice trembling, "we don't just lose Julian Thorne as an ally, we lose Ethan as a brother. He told us he wanted to be brave. He's choosing this danger." "It's not bravery, it's madness," Lucien shouted. "It's both," Adrian countered. "And it's the one thing we never allowed him to have, a secret, the break in the ice." Julian pulled back just an inch, his forehead resting against Ethan's. His ice mask was gone, replaced by a look of raw, unsettled wonder. He had expected to lead Ethan into a trap. He hadn't expected the bird to fly so willingly into the storm. "You're a dangerous thing, Ethan Vale," Julian murmured, his thumb stroking Ethan's reddened lip. "Your brothers are going to hunt me to the ends of the earth for that." "Let them hunt," Ethan said, his voice surprisingly steady. "They've spent their lives watching me. Maybe it's time I gave them something worth looking at." Ethan reached into his pocket and pulled out the distress beacon. He looked at the small, glowing device, the umbilical cord that kept him tied to his brother's will. With a small, defiant smile, he walked over to the glass bird sculpture and set the beacon on the pedestal next to it. He wasn't turning it on. He was leaving it behind. The exit. "Walk me to the car," Ethan commanded. Julian's eyebrows rose in amusement. He liked this version of Ethan, the one with the veil steel in his spine and the thorn fire in his eyes. "As you wish." They walked down the mezzanine stairs together, side by side. The gallery guests fell silent as they passed, the tension in the room thick enough to cut. Julian escorted him all the way to the heavy glass doors, opening them himself. As Ethan stepped out onto the sidewalk, he looked directly at the van parked across the street. He knew exactly where the cameras were. He knew exactly which rooftop Cassian's men were on. He didn't look for cover. He turned back to Julian, reached out, and straightened the man's tie in a slow, intimate gesture that he knew would be captured in high definition. "See you soon, Julian," Ethan said loudly enough for the hidden mic to catch. "Count on it," Julian replied. Ethan turned and walked to the black sedan. He opened the door himself, sat in the back, and looked Lucien right in the eye through the rearview mirror. "Drive," Ethan said. The war between the Vales and the Thorns hadn't ended. It had just changed. Ethan wasn't the territory anymore. He was the commander. And as the car pulled away, he realized the thrill of the danger wasn't just about the risk. It was about the power. The Cold War at home. The drive back was a vacuum of sound. Lucien didn't yell. He didn't lecture. He simply gripped the steering wheel so hard the leather groaned under his hands. In the back seat, Ethan watched the city lights flicker across the window, his lips still tingling with the ghost of Julian's touch. When they stepped into the foyer, Adrian and Cassian were already there. The command center in the library had been powered down, but the energy in the house was radioactive. "You left the beacon," Cassian said, his voice a low, dangerous rumble. He held the small device in his palm like it was a piece of shrapnel pulled from a wound. "You stood in a room with a man who has killed for less than a territorial insult, and you threw away your only lifeline." "I didn't throw it away," Ethan said, calmly unbuttoning his navy blazer. "I put it down. There's a difference." "He kissed you," Adrian stated. It wasn't a question. He stood at the foot of the stairs, the undisputed patriarch, yet he looked like he was watching his world crumble. "We saw it on the thermal, Ethan. We heard you tell him you'd see him soon." The power shift. Ethan didn't flinch. He walked into the center of the room, standing between his three brothers. For years, he had been the center of their circle, protected and small. Tonight, he felt like the axis they revolved around. "Yes, he did," Ethan said. "And I let him, because for the first time in 20 years, I felt something other than safe. I felt alive." "You're addicted to the rush," Lucien snapped, stepping forward. "You're confusing danger with affection. Ethan, Julian Thorn doesn't love people. He colonizes them. And what have you three been doing?" Ethan countered, his voice sharp as a blade. "You didn't just protect me. You occupied me. You turned my life into a fortress where I was the only prisoner. Julian isn't the one who built the cage, Lucien. He's just the one who showed me where the door was." Adrian stepped into the light, his expression shifting from anger to a chilling, professional calm. "If this is the game you want to play, Ethan, the game of shadows and thorn politics, then you need to understand the stakes. Julian isn't just courting you. He's courting a war with us. Is he worth the blood that will be spilled?" Ethan looked at Adrian, then at the two brothers behind him. "If you start a war because I chose to have a life, then the blood is on your hands, not mine. I am a Vale. If you want to fight, fight for me, not over me." The midnight visitor. Hours later, Ethan lay in his bed, staring at the ceiling. The house was silent, but it wasn't the peaceful silence of the past. It was the silence of an army waiting for the signal to charge. A soft thump sounded against his balcony door. Ethan sat up, his heart leaping. He slid the glass door open, expecting a guard, a drone. Anything but what he found. A single, black rose was tucked into the railing. Tied to the stem was a small, encrypted burner phone. As Ethan picked it up, the screen glowed to life. One message sat in the inbox. "The wires are humming, little bird. Your brothers are moving their assets to the docks. They're preparing to strike my shipments at dawn." Ethan's breath hitched. He looked out at the dark gardens, realizing the peace he had negotiated was already evaporating. His brothers were going to hit Julian to protect Ethan, and Julian was telling him about it. Not to save himself, but to see what Ethan would do. The choice. Ethan realized Julian was testing him. This was the thrill Julian had promised. The weight of a decision that could shift the power of the entire city. He could go to Adrian right now and stop the strike, proving he was still their good brother. Or he could stay silent and let Julian handle the fallout, proving he was a Thorn's partner. Or he could do something neither side expected. Ethan picked up the burner phone and typed a message back. Don't hit the docks. Meet me at the neutral zone, the old cathedral, in 1 hour. I'm bringing my brothers. He deleted the message and walked out of his room, heading straight for Adrian's study. He didn't knock. He didn't ask. He walked in and slammed the burner phone onto Adrian's desk. You want to protect me? Ethan asked his startled brothers. Then stop hiding in the shadows. We're going to meet him, together, face to face. The slow burn was over. The fire was spreading, and Ethan Vale was the one holding the match. The neutral ground. The old cathedral sat on the edge of the city, a skeletal remains of stone and stained glass that belonged to neither the Vales nor the Thorns. It was a place where treaties were signed in blood and ghosts were the only witnesses. A caravan of 3 black SUVs pulled into the gravel courtyard. Adrian, Lucien, and Cassian stepped out, their silhouettes sharp against the moonlight. They moved with a synchronized lethal grace, their eyes scanning every gargoyle and shadowed archway. Ethan stepped out last. He wasn't in the middle of their formation this time. He walked a pace ahead, his head held high. He's here, Cassian whispered, his hand hovering near his holster. From the dark maw of the cathedral's entrance, a single figure emerged. Julian Thorne didn't bring a caravan. He didn't bring a private army. He walked alone, his long coat swirling around his ankles like smoke. He stopped 10 feet away, the moonlight catching the predatory glint in his eyes. The standoff. A family outing, Julian remarked, his voice echoing off the stone walls. How touching. I assume the hit on my docks has been postponed. It's been cancelled, Adrian said, his voice a low, dangerous rasp. For now. Ethan insisted on this meeting. He seems to think there is a version of this story where you walk away with your life. Julian ignored Adrian, his gaze locking onto Ethan. The ice in his expression softened just a fraction. Not into warmth, but into a deep, appreciative respect. You brought them into the light, Ethan. I didn't think you had it in you. I told you I wasn't a pawn, Ethan said, stepping forward until he was the bridge between the two empires. You want to use me to hurt them. They want to use my safety to destroy you. I'm done being the excuse for your war. The thrill of the edge. Ethan turned back to his brothers. If you attack his shipments, he will retaliate against our distributors. The city will burn, and you'll have to lock me in a basement to keep me safe from the fallout. Is that what you want? To rule a graveyard with a brother who hates you? Then he turned to Julian. And you? If you think you can court me while undermining my family, you're wrong. I am a Vale. If you want me, you accept them. You don't get to play the hero by burning my house down. The silence that followed was heavy with the weight of decades of rivalry. Lucien and Cassian looked at Adrian, waiting for the signal to end the Thorne lineage once and for all. Julian stood perfectly still, his hand tucked into his pocket, looking at Ethan with a dark, growing hunger that had nothing to do with business. He's right, Julian said, a short, dry laugh escaping him. He's more dangerous than all 3 of you combined. He's the only one willing to let the whole board break. The new order. Julian walked forward. He didn't stop until he was inches from Ethan, ignoring the 3 guns that were likely aimed at his spine from the shadows. He reached out and tucked a stray strand of hair behind Ethan's ear. You want a truce? Julian whispered, so only Ethan could hear. I want a choice, Ethan replied. Julian looked past Ethan at Adrian. Your brother is bored of your protection, Adrian, and I am bored of our stalemate. I propose a new treaty. No strikes on shipments. No territorial incursions. In exchange, I get to see him, without your snipers, without your drones. Adrian's jaw tightened. And if you touch him? He's the one who decided to meet me here, Julian said, his eyes never leaving Ethan's. He's the one who stayed in the room at the gallery. I don't have to touch him to win, Adrian. He's already curious. The dangerous piece. Adrian looked at Ethan, his youngest brother, the one he had tried to keep pure from the world they lived in. He realized then that the boy was gone. In his place was a man who looked at a thorn and didn't flinch. "The truce holds," Adrian said, the words sounding like ash in his mouth. "1 month. If a single thorn scout crosses the line, or if Ethan comes home with so much as a scratch, the city burns." Lucien bowed his head slightly. "Acceptable." As the Valles turned to head back to their cars, Ethan lingered for a moment. He looked at Lucien, the man who had offered him the thrill of the cliffside. "You got what you wanted," Ethan said. "A truce." "No, Ethan," Lucien said, reaching out to catch Ethan's hand, his thumb grazing the pulse point at his wrist. "I got what I wanted. The chance to see if you'll come to the edge on your own." Ethan didn't pull his hand away. He let the heat of Julian's touch burn into his skin for one long, silent moment before turning back to his brothers. He was walking back into the cage, but the bars were different now. They were wide enough for a viper to slip through, and for the first time, Ethan found himself hoping the viper wouldn't wait a month. The permeable fortress. The month of the truce began not with a bang, but with a suffocating, watchful silence. The snipers were gone from the rooftops, and the drones no longer hummed over the garden, but the manor felt like it was holding its breath. Adrian, Lucien, and Cassian moved through the halls like ghosts of their former selves. They had agreed to the terms, but the restraint was eating them alive. They watched Ethan from doorways, their eyes tracing the new, sharp confidence in his stride. He wasn't their little bird anymore. He was a power in his own right, and that terrified them more than any thorn assassin ever could. Ethan, meanwhile, lived in the tension. He spent his mornings in the library and his afternoons wandering the city, truly alone for the first time. But he wasn't looking for normal anymore. He was looking for the chill, the unscheduled visit. 2 weeks into the truce, the ice finally broke the perimeter. It was a Tuesday, raining heavily. Ethan was sitting in a secluded corner of a high-end bookstore, hidden behind a stack of philosophy texts. He didn't hear footsteps, but he felt the air change. The sudden, sharp scent of rain and expensive cedarwood filled his senses. "You're reading about ethics." Julian's voice drifted over the top of the shelf. "A bit late for that, isn't it? You've already made a deal with a devil." Ethan didn't jump. He simply closed the book and looked up. Lucien was standing there, his coat damp, his eyes dark and unreadable. He looked out of place among the quiet books. Too large, too predatory. "You're breaking the rules," Ethan whispered, a thrill of fear and excitement shooting through him. "You're within the 1-block radius of the manor. If my brothers find out." "They already know," Lucien said, sitting in the velvet chair across from Ethan. "I walked past your brother Lucien at the entrance. He looked like he wanted to rip my throat out with his bare teeth, but he stayed in his seat. It seems your new order is holding." The slow burn. Lucien leaned forward, his elbows on his knees. The space between them was small, charged with the memory of the gallery mezzanine. "I didn't come here to talk about your brothers, Ethan. I came to see if the thrill had worn off. Most people find that once the cage door is open, the outside world is too cold for them. They go crawling back to the warmth of their captors." "I'm not most people," Ethan said, his voice low and steady. "And I'm not crawling back to anything." Lucien reached out, his bare hand covering Ethan's on the table. His skin was cool, but the pressure was firm. "Then prove it. Come to dinner. No public galleries. No neutral cathedrals. My home. Tonight." Ethan felt his pulse spike. A Thorn's home was a fortress, a place where the Vale name meant nothing. To go there was to step off the cliff entirely. "If I go," Ethan said, searching Julian's eyes, "I'm not going as a hostage, and I'm not going as a spy." "You're going as my guest," Lucien replied, his thumb beginning a slow, rhythmic circle over Ethan's knuckles. "And perhaps, as something more, if you're brave enough to find out what that is." The departure. Ethan returned to the manor only to change. He found all 3 of his brothers standing in the foyer, an invisible wall of protective fury. "He was at the bookstore," Cassian hissed. "We stayed back. We followed the rules. But now you're dressing for him again." I'm going to his house, Ethan said, his voice echoing in the marble hall. The reaction was instantaneous. Lucien slammed a hand against the wall. Adrian turned pale. Cassian stepped forward, his eyes burning. Ethan, you can't, Adrian pleaded, his voice cracking. His home is a black hole. If he decides not to let you out, we can't get to you without starting a war that will level the city. Then trust me to walk out on my own, Ethan said. He walked up to Adrian, the brother who had carried the world for him. You asked me once if he was worth the blood. I don't know yet, but I know I'm worth the risk of finding out. Ethan walked past them and out into the rain. A silver coupe was waiting at the end of the drive. He didn't look back at the three men standing in the doorway of the gilded cage. He stepped into the car, the door closing with a heavy, final thud. As the car sped away, Julian looked at Ethan in the dim light of the dashboard. He didn't say a word. He simply reached over and took Ethan's hand, interlacing their fingers. The slow burn had reached the heart of the Thorn Empire. And as the gates of Julian's estate swung open, Ethan realized he wasn't just chasing a thrill anymore. He was chasing the only person who met the gravity of the truth. The Thorn estate was a masterpiece of glass, steel, and shadows. Unlike the Vale Manor, which felt like a museum of past glories, Julian's home felt like a living machine, silent, efficient, and cold. Julian led Ethan into a private dining room where the walls were floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the rain-slicked city. The air between them was thick with everything that hadn't been said. Julian didn't call for servants. He poured the wine himself, his movements fluid and precise. Ethan sat at the edge of his chair, the sheer weight of being inside the viper's den, making his nerves hum. My brothers think you brought me here to use me as a shield, Ethan said, breaking the silence. They think this is all a game to spite them. Julian set the bottle down with a soft clink. He didn't sit. He walked toward Ethan, his pace slow and deliberate, until he was standing directly over him. Spite them? Julian asked, his voice a low, dark vibration. Is that really what you think this is? The hunter's admission. Julian reached down, his hands gripping the arms of Ethan's chair, effectively caging him in. He leaned in until their foreheads were almost touching. Do you really believe it was a coincidence, Ethan, that I just happened to be standing in that alleyway the day you finally broke cover? Ethan's breath hitched. Wasn't it? No, Julian whispered, the ice in his eyes shattering to reveal a raw, unsettling honesty. I've been watching you for 2 years. Every gala, every silent auction, every boring charity event where you stood like a statue between Adrian and Lucien. You were a masterpiece behind a velvet rope, and I couldn't take my eyes off you. He let out a short, sharp breath, his gaze dropping to Ethan's lips before snapping back to his eyes. At first, I told myself it was strategy. I wanted to find the weakness in the Vale armor. But then I saw you look at a window when they weren't watching. I saw the way you looked at the door like it was a mountain you couldn't climb. It wasn't curiosity anymore. It was an obsession. The live confession. Julian's hand moved from the chair to Ethan's face, his thumb tracing the line of his jaw with a trembling intensity that Julian Thorne never showed to the world. I didn't run into you in that alley, Ethan. I followed you. I waited for you. I knew the second you stepped out of that manor without a guard. I wanted to be the first thing you saw when you realized the world was bigger than your brother's shadows. I wanted to be the person who showed you what it felt like to actually breathe. You planned it all? Ethan whispered, his heart hammering against his ribs. I orchestrated the meeting, yes, Julian admitted, his voice dropping to a gravelly, intimate hum. But I didn't plan for this. I didn't plan for the way my chest tightens when you look at me like you're not afraid. I didn't plan for the fact that I'd rather burn this city to the ground than see you back in that house. He leaned in closer, his lips brushing against Ethan's ear. This isn't about spiting Adrian. I don't give a damn about your brother's pride. I want you because you're the only thing in this life that doesn't feel like a transaction. I want the fire in you that they've been trying to put out for 20 years. The choice. Lucien pulled back just enough to look Ethan in the eye. For the first time, the predator looked vulnerable. I am a monster, Ethan. I've lived in the cold so long I forgot what the sun felt like until I saw you standing in that gallery. You can go back to them. You can be safe and bored and protected until your heart stops. Or you can stay here, in the middle of the storm, with me. Ethan looked at the man who had stalked him from the shadows, the man who had lied about a chance encounter just to get close to him. By any logic, he should have run. But as he looked at Lucien, Ethan felt a surge of power. He wasn't a victim of a coincidence. He was the center of a grand, dark design. He reached out, his fingers curling into Julien's shirt, pulling the ice of the city into his own heat. "You're a liar?" Ethan whispered, his eyes searching Julien's. "I am," Lucien agreed, his hand covering Ethan's, pinning it to his chest so he could feel the frantic thud of his heart. "But I'm a liar who will never let anyone put you in a cage again. Not even me." Ethan didn't say another word. He closed the gap, meeting Julien's lips in a kiss that tasted of rain, secrets, and a danger that felt more like home than any palace ever could. The inheritance of risk. The heat of their kiss still lingered in the cool air of the dining room as Lucien pulled back, his hands remaining firm on Ethan's waist. The confession that Lucien had been watching him, hunting for this very moment, settled between them like a heavy fog. "You've spent your life being a Vale," Lucien whispered, his gaze intense. "But now that the cage is open, you have to realize the world isn't just sunshine and freedom. The shadows, my shadows." Ethan stepped back just enough to look Lucien in the eye, his expression shifting from a haze of passion to a sharp, grounded clarity. "I'm not a child, Lucien," Ethan said firmly. "I understand my brothers. I know the enemies the Vales have are wild, unpredictable, and violent. And I know that by standing here, by choosing this, I'm inheriting the thorn enemies too. I'm trading one bullseye for another. The flood and the security." Lucien let out a low, dark chuckle that vibrated through the quiet room. He walked toward the window, looking out at the city as if he already owned every street light and skyscraper. "My enemies?" Lucien asked, turning his head slightly. "My enemies know well not to mess with the ice. They understand a fundamental truth. While ice stands frozen, massive, and silent, it can unfreeze at any moment. And when it does, it doesn't just melt, it floods. It sweeps away entire districts, burying everything that dared to stand in its path." He turned fully, walking back toward Ethan with a predatory grace. "Have you ever seen me with a motorcade, Ethan? Have you ever seen me surrounded by a wall of suits and earpieces like your brothers? No, because I don't need security. I am the security. Anyone who tries to get to me through you will find out exactly how cold the water gets before they drown. The ultimate condition." Ethan listened, the thrill of Julien's power coiling in his gut, but he didn't let it sweep him away. He stood his ground, the Vale steel in his spine finally tempering the thorn fire in his blood. "I believe you're dangerous," Ethan said. "But if this, whatever this thing we have going is, if it's going to yield to anything real, you have to learn how to be civil with my brothers." Julien's eyes narrowed, his expression flickering with a cold disdain. "I've spent the last few weeks rebelling against them," Ethan continued, stepping into Julien's space. "I've screamed at them and I've run from them. But I love them. I understand them. They did what they did because they were afraid of losing me to men like you. If you want a partner, you have to respect the family I came from. You have to learn to sit at a table with them without a war breaking out." A fragile diplomacy. The tension in the room was palpable. No one gave Lucien Thorne ultimatums. No one told the flood where to go. But as Lucien looked at Ethan, at the defiance in his eyes and the way he didn't flinch, his jaw tightened, then slowly relaxed. "You're asking me to play the diplomat with 3 men who would gladly put a bullet in my brain," Lucien noted, his voice dropping into a dry, sardonic hum. "You want me to share a meal with Adrian Vale and talk about the weather? I want you to try," Ethan insisted, reaching out to grip Julien's forearm. "Because they are my heart, and you, You are the person I'm choosing to follow into the dark. I won't choose between you. I'm the architect now, Julian. And I'm building a bridge, not a wall. Julian looked down at Ethan's hand, then back up at his face. He let out a long, weary sigh, a sound of rare concession. You are an exhausting man, Ethan Vale. Fine. I will be civil. I will keep the flood contained, as long as they understand that you are no longer their property. The blueprint. Ethan leaned in, resting his forehead against Julian's. The danger was still there, lurking in the corners of the room, but the weight of the cage felt lighter than it ever had. So, Ethan whispered, aside from being a veil, and aside from being your shadow, what am I building? Julian smiled, a slow, genuine turn of his lips. Whatever you want. I have a restoration project in the old district, a grand gallery that was gutted by fire years ago. It needs someone who knows how to take something broken and give it a soul again. It needs a designer who isn't afraid of the history. Ethan's heart leaped. It wasn't a gift of safety. It was a gift of purpose. I think I can manage that. Outside, the rain continued to wash the city clean. Inside, the Vale's treasure and the Thorn's king were no longer just enemies or lovers. They were co-conspirators. The cage was gone, replaced by a blueprint for a life that was finally, terrifyingly, their own. The return to the gates. The silver coupe glided to a halt at the edge of the Vale estate. The rain had slowed to a light mist, turning the stone pillars of the entrance into dark, glistening sentinels. For a moment, the car remained silent, the engine humming like a low-frequency heartbeat. Julian looked at the front door, where the porch light was already on. A silent signal that the three older Vales were waiting. The lions are at the gate, Julian murmured, his hand lingering on the steering wheel. Are you ready to face the pride? Ethan smiled, reaching over to squeeze Julian's hand. I've spent my life being afraid of their love. I think I can handle their worry. He stepped out of the car, and Julian watched him walk toward the house, not with the hesitant steps of a runaway, but with the steady stride of a man returning home. The burden of the crown. As Ethan stepped into the foyer, the air was thick with unspoken tension. Adrian, Lucien, and Cassian were there, standing in a semicircle, looking like they hadn't breathed since Ethan left. Before they could speak, before Lucien could demand an itinerary or Cassian could check for bruises, Ethan moved. He didn't pull away. Instead, he walked straight into the center of them. He hugged Lucien first, then Cassian, before finally burying his face in Adrian's chest. The three titans froze, then slowly, almost tentatively, wrapped their arms around him. I'm back, Ethan whispered into the silence. He pulled back just enough to look at Adrian. Up close, the toll of the last few weeks was visible. The fine lines around Adrian's eyes had deepened, and the permanent tension in his jaw made him look 10 years older. Ethan reached up, his fingers gently caressing the features of the brother who had carried the weight of the Vale crown since their parents died. The teacher and the pilot. I know how hard it was, Ethan said softly, his voice echoing in the marble hall. I know that when Mom and Dad died, you three didn't just become my brothers, you became my world. You had to grow up in a single night so I wouldn't have to. Adrian's eyes glassed over, a rare moment of vulnerability from the man who ruled the city's shadows. I'm flying now, Ethan continued, looking at Lucien and Cassian. I'm stepping into the storm, but I will never forget who taught me how to fly. I will never forget whose shoulders I stood on to see the horizon. He took their hands, bringing the three of them into a tighter circle. I still want you to care for me. I still want to be your baby brother. I need your advice, and I need your love. But it has to be healthy. No more cages. Okay? Just a home to come back to. The reality check. The emotional weight of the moment was so heavy it felt like the walls might buckle. Adrian let out a long, shuddering breath, resting his forehead against Ethan's. We just didn't want the world to break you, Adrian admitted. Ethan let out a soft laugh and pulled away, wiping a stray tear from his eye. He looked at the three of them. all dressed in their expensive, somber suits, looking like the world's most protective funeral directors. "All right, enough with the waterworks," Ethan said, his voice turning playful. "Look at the three of you. You look like you've aged 20 years in a month. It's pathetic, honestly." Lucien blinked, confused by the sudden shift in tone. "Ethan? Seriously?" Ethan teased, gesturing to the graying hair at Adrian's temples and the frown lines on Cassian's face. "You three are some old niggas. You're so busy watching my life that you've completely forgotten to have your own. You all need to get into a relationship and find someone else to obsess over. Maybe then you'll stop hovering over me like I'm a Faberge egg." A new dawn. The silence that followed was shocked, then slowly, broken by a snort of laughter from Cassian. Lucien followed, shaking his head, and finally, even Adrian let out a genuine, weary chuckle. "Is that your professional opinion?" Adrian asked, his voice finally losing its edge. "It's my baby brother opinion," Ethan retorted, heading toward the stairs. "Go to bed. All of you. You have bags under your eyes that even a Vale bank account can't fix." As Ethan climbed the stairs, he felt the oppressive weight of the manor finally begin to lift. He was still a Vale and he was still their baby brother. But for the first time, he wasn't the only one who needed to grow. Downstairs, the three brothers watched him go, finally realizing that the best way to protect their treasure wasn't to hide it, but to let it shine. The Great Thaw. 6 months later, the neutral territory wasn't a crumbling cathedral or a rainy alleyway. It was the grand dining room of the Vale Manor. The air was thick with a tension that was less like a war zone and more like a high-stakes chess match. Adrian, Lucien, and Cassian sat on one side of the mahogany table, looking as though they had swallowed granite. Opposite them sat Julian Thorne, relaxed in a charcoal suit, looking entirely too comfortable in the seat of his former rivals. At the head of the table sat Ethan. He looked vibrant, his sleeves rolled up, his hands stained with a bit of ink from his gallery restoration blueprints, and a smile that finally reached his eyes. The silent treaty. The dinner had been a masterclass in tactical silence. The Vales had agreed to this family dinner under one condition: that Julian didn't bring up the 2024 dock incident. Julian had agreed under one condition: that he didn't have to pretend to like Adrian's choice of vintage wine. "The expansion in the old district is nearly finished," Ethan said, breaking a particularly long silence as he gestured to his blueprints on the sideboard. "We're opening next month." "We're very proud," Lucien said, his voice clipped but sincere. He shot a look at Julian. "Though we still have concerns about the perimeter security of that district." "The perimeter is handled, Lucien," Julian said smoothly, his voice like silk. "My men are invisible, and your men are loud. Between the two, the boy is the safest person in the hemisphere." Cassian grunted, stabbing a roasted carrot. "He's not a boy." "No," Julian agreed, his gaze softening as it landed on Ethan. "He certainly isn't." The power move. The main course arrived, a slow-roasted lamb that smelled of rosemary and peace offerings. As the serving dishes were placed, Julian didn't wait for the staff. He reached for the serving spoon, his movements fluid and possessive. He filled Ethan's bowl first, piling it with the best cuts and the most vibrant vegetables, as if it were the most natural thing in the world to nourish a Vale. Then Julian paused. He held the spoon aloft, his eyes locking onto Adrian's. The ice in Julian's expression flickered with a sudden, mischievous glint, the kind of look a man gives when he knows exactly which button he's about to press. "You look a bit peaked, Adrian," Julian said, his voice dripping with mock concern. He gestured with the dripping spoon toward Adrian's empty bowl. "The stress of being a retired helicopter brother must be draining. Do you want me to fill your bowl too? Or do you need Lucien to cut your meat for you?" Lucien choked on his wine. Cassian's fork clattered against his plate. The final accord. Adrian's eyes narrowed into slits. For a heartbeat, it felt like the truce might shatter, that the silver knives on the table might finally find their targets. Adrian looked at the spoon, then at Julian's smug, elegant face, and finally at Ethan. Ethan was hiding a grin behind his water glass, his eyes dancing with the sheer absurdity of the moment. Adrian let out a long, heavy sigh, the sound of a man who had finally accepted that he couldn't win this particular battle. He pushed his bowl forward an inch. "Just the vegetables, Thorn," Adrian rasped. "And if you drop a single drop on the tablecloth, the truce is over." Lucien smirked, expertly dolloping a pile of carrots into the Vale patriarch's bowl. "Careful, Adrian. Acceptance is the first step toward us being best friends." "Don't push it," the three brothers said in unison. The new blueprint. As the night wore on, the barbs became less pointed and the silences less heavy. They weren't a happy family, not yet. They were two empires trying to learn a new language, with Ethan acting as the translator. Ethan looked around the table. He saw the three men who had taught him how to survive, and the one man who had taught him how to live. He saw a city that was no longer a cage, but a playground. He reached under the table, finding Julian's hand and squeezing it. Julian squeezed back, his thumb tracing that familiar, grounding circle on Ethan's skin. The Vales were still protective, the thorns were still dangerous, and the city was still cold. But as the sound of reluctant laughter echoed through the manor, Ethan realized he had achieved the impossible. He had built his bridge. And for the first time in his life, the bird wasn't just flying, he was leading the flock.